Okay, so they actually told me to get started with this presentation, even though everybody's grabbing lunch, and we'll record it. I think this is on. So I'll go ahead and talk to you all, and then as people show up with from lunch, they can join and catch up on the recorded video. So we're good? All right. So this is going to be kind of just a quick presentation and demo. It's more of something that I just got an idea about at MEC, and then worked with the team in Beijing they helped me with the adapting the test suite to basically plug together some code to get Autodiscover, Exchange Web Services, and then MAPIHTTP working together in a kind of custom code project. So there's basically proving the concept that we can interop between these two protocols by doing some ID translation. So most of this is targeted not to kind of a man in the middle or any of that, but to like an archive or backup vendor or somebody who has used MAPI for whatever reason, historically relied on Outlook's MAPI provider maybe, and is looking to move to a different provider architecture, control more of the stack. So a quick review of Exchange Web Services. So a lot of these people that use MAPI today, so they may use Outlook's MAPI provider, we continue to tell, or the Exchange product group continues to tell these ISVs, you need to stop using Outlook MAPI provider. It's going away. It's going away. You need to move to Exchange Web Services. So in the world of backup and archive, that message kind of falls on deaf ears because there are certain limitations with Exchange Web Services in backup and archive that are going to limit your solution, and it's not really an option. So most of them continue to use Outlook's MAPI provider today or the Exchange MAPI download. So just to review from our last Plugfest I was at 2 years ago talking about this, these are some slides from that. This is backup and restore and the limitations of that if you're purely EWS based. So we really have two kind of built-in options. One is you can pull MIME content for any given item. And if that's good enough for you, maybe that works. Many of the archive and backup vendors have been using MAPI to store either their own format or pull MSG file format or something else. So that may not work. For a pure backup and restore scenario, we have export items and upload items in EWS. Those are two operations that pull. Export pulls an opaque stream that you can store for the entire contents of a message. You can push it back up to Exchange using upload items, and it will restore it, but you can't parse it. We don't document the format of that stream. We don't have any support in EWS for pulling MSGs or PST files directly, so that's the biggest kind of thing that people look for. The PowerShell has some support of it, but it's not really scalable for a backup or archive vendor. So I won't go into the details of each of these in the interest of time. This deck will be shared. And again, I kind of talked through this before in the previous Plugfest. So the challenge here that I wanted to take on was to be able to access a mailbox using Exchange Web Services, find an item that I wanted to pull all properties for using ROPS, and then interoperate between the two. So basically what I ended up doing was taking some of the test suite code and some help from the protocol team that they did a MAPI adapter that we'll look at, and then bolted on some Exchange Web Services managed API code to pull the item, and then basically pieced the two things together with some information from the protocol documentation. So the disclaimer here is I just thought this was cool, and I went out and did it. It's not an official statement from the Exchange product group that this is what they expect you to do or want to do. However, having worked with a lot of backup and archive vendors for a number of years now, I know that you kind of get pigeonholed into a corner here. You don't have a lot of options, especially with if you're relying on Outlook's MAPI provider. So what you'll see here is a way to use MAPIHTTP to kind of own the whole stack. And what you'll see today is no dependency on Outlook at all. So you could run this on a server that has no Outlook on it, which is a big benefit to vendors in this space. So I've kind of talked through a bit of this as well, just the background of why you want to move away. The big thing are the bottom 3 bullets. If you're an archive or backup vendor, if you wanted to control more of the stack, if you want to move to Exchange Web Services as much as you can, because you'll get some efficiencies of scale for that, and then limit the controllable portion for your message extraction, and then if you want to support Office 365. So the demo I'm going to do today as well works against a mailbox that's in Office 365. It's not an on-prem mailbox. So I also wanted to see if we could minimize the input required. So if you're familiar with MAPI and using MAPI, you're building out profiles. It's very complicated. There's a lot of information that you have to gather and configure and set in the registry, et cetera. I wanted to boil this down to just inputting your email and your password. Use Autodiscover to get URLs, but make the input as minimal as possible. I wanted to make one Autodiscover call to get both the URLs for EWS and for MAPI. And then I want to minimize the use of MAPIHTTP. So I do as much as I can with EWS because that's a supported preferred method, and then I limit the scope of the ROPs that I'm going to do just for the part to fill in the gaps for what EWS doesn't provide for me, which is the ability to get all properties of a message in a consumable format. I wanted to stick with, going back to my disclaimer of this not being necessarily endorsed. If my solution can be 97% supportable by Exchange and I can limit this one last MAPI HTTP piece, that's what I was looking for. And you could. It's also going to be more complicated potentially. Just at least the code. So Exchange Web Services for crawling a mailbox and finding items is very performant, very easy code to write. You get down into the ROPs, it gets very complicated. I also am doing this all from managed code. It's all C# code that we're looking at here too. So kind of just keeping the solution simple. If I'm moving from a world where I used MAPI DLL on a box with Outlook on it, going down to the ROPs, that's going to be a big code change anyway. So keeping this solution simple with EWS was a goal of mine. But you certainly could do this all with ROPs if you wanted to. I also wanted to have, and this last bullet kind of goes back to more of what we were talking about with the protocols team when I was putting this together, is there's nothing I'm doing here that's not documented in the protocol documentation. There's no like magic function that I inject in here just to make all of this work happily. This is all documented in the protocols and using published APIs. So basically, this is it, and then I'll show it to you. So I do a single Autodiscover call, and I'll show you how I did that with the EWS managed API. So it's very simple, just a few lines of code. That gives me the EWS URL, the MAPI URL, and the DN of the target mailbox. Then I can do a find item call with EWS. In this case, I'm just simply getting the first item in the mailbox. That gives me back an EWS-based item ID. So it's an ID format specific to EWS. In EWS, you have a convert ID function, which converts it to a MAPI entry ID, which is what, if you've used Outlook's MAPI provider, that's what it uses. But then step number 4 was kind of the key piece of information that we had to pull out, which is at the ROP level, I'm working with message ID and folder ID. So I have to tease out and parse the entry ID that I get to get these ROP IDs, and then I convert that the long-term ID to actual ROP ID to get a message handle, and then get all properties from the message with that message handle. So this is yep. Yep. So at this point, this is just what I chose to do, just to get a bunch of properties. You could obviously change these out. I was talking to some other folks about you could use fast transfer or different other stream formats if you wanted to. There's no ROP that gives you an MSG file, but you can use this ROP and then use the protocols for creating an MSG if you wanted to. So this is a look at the Autodiscover response that we get here, and I'll show you in the code the headers that we add and all this. But in one single response, I get the legDN of the target mailbox in bold there. I get the, for the MAPIHTP protocol, I get the external URL, and I use that. And then down here, I also get, this is the AS URL, which is the availability service URL, which is always Exchange Web Services. It's what Outlook uses for availability. So AS URL is the web services URL that I use. Because I highlighted the wrong one. But I actually pull, you'll see in the code, I pull the EMS MDB. Yep. I just bolded the wrong one. All right. So then once I've done the EWS calls to get the entry ID, I'm simply just pulling off the database GUID and the global counter. These elements, I combine these to make the long-term IDs for the ROP to get the ROP IDs that I use in the ROPs that I make. So basically, if we go out here, this was really just a matter of finding the documentation in the protocol. But we document the structure of it. And I go right down here, and I just pulled it out. So I'm just simply parsing that the array that I get back there. So that was a key piece for me. And then finding this ROP, and then I made the connection of, hey, I've got the GUID and the global counter. I get a long-term ID, and that's what I need to pass to my to the ROP. So let's take a look at it. So I'll just run through it, and it'll be fairly simple. Kind of watch what it's doing. It's doing auto discover right now. This is the part that takes the longest. Is doing the auto discover. So once that's done, so that's complete now, and I'm just going to get the first item, and that's going to do the EWS steps as well as the MAPI ROPs. And you can see here, so it's pulled all of, I didn't write any fancy code to kind of parse through all the tags and all the data and everything. I just dumped it out. So that's all the properties dumped out for this existing item. You can see the steps that we went through here. I'm definitely going to show you the code. So that's what the code does. Now let's go look at the code. So the test suite is going to be published. If you look at my project here, so I've got this, let me zoom in here again. So this part up here is just the MAPI test suite. So that will be published. This part here is yet to be determined whether it will be published or not. I'm hoping that it will be, and I'm submitting it to Michael to be published, so hopefully they put it out there. I think they're trying to confirm whether they want to definitely support that or not, or what it means to put this out there. But it's fairly simple, and we'll look at what I'm doing. So the first thing we'll look at, just very simply, is the auto discover portion. This is EWS managed API code here. So it's very simple to call auto discover service. I create a new service object. The key thing here is I set a couple headers, the MAPIHTP capability header. I'm setting that to the non-zero value of the protocol level that I support.
The service
Yep.
object is shared across the front or everything takes care of the networking stuff?
So it's basically like a HTTP web request object with a bunch of EWS stuff on top of it. So it doesn't have any kind of state. So I basically create a new one. It's just a shell for all of that.
How you run the networking stuff is
It's all below at the .NET level. Yep. Yep. What's that? So it can be, it's one, it can be two for the version level of the protocol that you support. But so in this case, the key is that it's non-zero. But yeah, in most cases I've seen this as one, and I'm not sure why it's two there. But as long as it's non-zero, it'll get me what I want here. So that's why the code works. Then the next line here is my favorite HTTP header, anchor mailbox. Right? We talked about that yesterday and what that does.
Joe answered that in the presentation. He says that it would, I don't know if it was even out there, it will be the highest lower dominator between everything that comes here.
Right.
And then the server will choose the highest one that it can support.
That it can support between.
If you put 10,
You'll come back to 1 if that's it. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's basically it. And basically what the EWS Managed API does is it takes care of issuing the request. I have to create, if you're familiar with the API, one of the things that this service object does is it has a listener interface where I can basically just get back all the requests and responses that are on the wire. Since it doesn't explicitly support MAPIHTTP protocol, I have to create a listener, which will scroll down. And what it does is it grabs the raw request and then I parse it out. So I have to do my own parsing of the AS URL as well as the legDN and
so you can create your own row reader.
exactly. And then I pull out the EMS MDBs. This is from the mail store element. I get the external URL. So that request I showed you before, this is just parsing that out manually. If you're purely doing EWS, you can do a lot cleaner solution here where the API knows about what settings you're requesting, and you can use this user setting element here and request the specific URL. It's just not built into the API. So again, the EWS piece of this is extremely simple. It's basically, once I set up my my service object here, it's a one-liner to do a find items against the inbox and get the first item. So that's very simple. And then the convert ID, again, is only a few lines of code where I pass in the EWS item ID, and then I ask for the hex entry ID back, which is the MAPI entry ID. And then the actual interesting part here, I'm doing some really inelegant. This is on the ROP side. So this is where I'm basically taking the entry IDs, the MAPI entry IDs, and just doing a really, really crude parsing of the database GUID and counter. And then using the test suite code, we go down and actually issue the ROPs to the convert ID.
So which object you're issuing the ROPs on? It's not the service object, right?
Right. So to go, let me see if it's in here. So the first step that I do here is I do, and you're familiar from Joe's talk yesterday. So I do that. This does the connect and it does the ROP log on. Actually, if I can step you back.
Wait, what's the new object that you created over there?
So this is in the test suite. Yeah, it's the OX ROPS client, OXC ROPS client.
The ROPs client.
Yep.
That will go over MAPIHTTP.
Yep.
And then you do the connect, you get the cookie.
Yep.
And then you can start working with that.
Exactly. And the test suites are really powerful in that they give you all that plumbing is done for you. So I've got using these test suites, I essentially have an object for all the ROPs that I'm issuing. So I mean, even in this case, what we're looking at, if you wanted to write your own code against the test suites to put scenarios together, it's super easy. So I'm an EWS guy, not a ROP guy, but it was really easy to pull this together. And I'll flip back to the test suite too. And you go in here. Yeah, maybe. So they have all these ROPs here in the test suite. So everything's there. All the plumbing is hooked up. And so, this function I wrote here, but it's very simple to look at the protocol docs, plug it all together. I get my response, and then I just pass back a crude array of all the base64 information and just write it out. From there is where you would format it however you want and all that. But it's pretty cool how easy that was to put together. I know that there are a lot of partners have struggled with how do you move from MAPI to EWS. If you can make that move and then use this to kind of plug some final holes and get your solution going, or automate some interesting scenarios for testing or something like that, it's actually pretty easy to do with the test suite. So, any questions on that? Any more that you want to see? Yes. Yeah. Do I map them? So I could. I didn't go into that deep. Yeah.
So there's a key value here that you're basically dumping.
Right.
There's some special case stuff on the key part of it.
Right. Right. There is
So there would actually have to be some more rocks, I guess, that would look back.
to maybe look back to do the lookups to get like the prop set GUID and things like that. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. The name, yeah, the long IDs. Yeah. So you might have to get into that again. I kind of stopped at the part where I got all the properties, but yeah, that's a good point. So from this, you're basically getting the prop ID and then the type, and then you'd have to go back and look up for the named props and things like that to get more information. Yep. The other thing, if I was a backup vendor, the other thing I might look at is a fast transfer ROPS there, which would give me a stream, and then I can go and parse that. That might give me more flexibility than doing the all props here. So just to recap on that, and this will be in the presentation, these are basically all the different protocol docs that were used in this example to kind of pull it all together so you can follow it. Kind of goes top to bottom, down from EWS down to the ROPS. Cool. So again, not something that was much more on my part than just taking pieces already together and just putting a little glue between them, but it was cool to figure out that you could do it. And then I guess in the spirit of being potentially a troublemaker pushing the envelope, I definitely wanted to share that here and get it out there. So any questions? If not, thanks.